and welcome to another episode of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is James. I'm from our education department here, and we have my friends Dana and Luke in the studio today helping out running the computer, and then Luke will be helping by answering some of your questions. If you'd like to text in some of your questions about birds today, please feel free to text us at 562-286-1838. Even if you're not watching live, you can still participate and ask us questions by emailing us. If you want to email us, you can do so at live@lbaop.org, and we'll have our staff helping to answer some of those questions. All right, if you tuned in last hour, Dana did a great job talking about penguins. This episode, from penguins to puffins, we can talk about all the different kinds of birds that might live on our planet, but we only have 30 minutes, so we'll focus on a few very special ones that we have here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Well, puffins are very similar to penguins, aren't they? Let's take a look at a puffin, and what can you tell me is similar to a penguin? Now, you can shout out your answers to your friends around you. You can text us your answers too. But what do you see is the same between this bird, which is the tufted puffin, and a penguin? I noticed some colors. What colors do you see? We have some orange feet and a really orange bill or a beak. What else do we... Oh, we have this very lovely feather pattern on the back of their head. And they have very similar coloring to a penguin. Well, let's try looking at another puffin. We have two species that live here, the tufted puffin and the horned puffin. Do we see more similarities to penguins? Yeah, their colors, black and white colors. Now, if you remember why penguins have black and white colors, it's not because they like to dress fancy, it's because of where they live. When they're in the ocean, they're using this adaptation called counter shading so that they can look like they're hiding in the water when they're really not. Their light bellies allow them to hide from things underneath them, and their dark backs help them hide from stuff above them. Now, these are birds that dive. So do penguins. Do penguins fly, though? No, they don't. It might look like they fly underwater, but they're too heavy. They can't fly through the air. Their bodies are very dense. So dense is when things are closer together. So like our social distancing right now, we're being less dense by spreading apart, right? Well, bird bones are normally low density, so that allows them to be lighter weight to fly. Some birds, like the diving birds, like puffins and auks and the pigeon guillemots, they have kind of this in-between where they're able to fly, but they are heavy enough that they can dive pretty deep into the water. Now, we have a few species of diving birds here at our aquarium, and we have the little auklets. Dana ran through the pictures so fast I couldn't tell you all of them. This is our auklet. I love their little hair thing going off in the front. It's their feathers, but it looks like they have this special hairdo going on. These are our smallest of our diving birds at our exhibit here. And then the next one that we saw was the pigeon guillemot. The pigeon guillemot is kind of an in-between size. It stands probably about this tall. And they have coloring that changes between summer and winter. Very, very large amount of color change. I think on the exhibit right now, they've been going through some of their color changes. But then we already saw the two species of puffins, the tufted puffin and the horned puffin. The horned puffin has these little feathers that are right above their eyes that kind of look like little horns, and that's where they get their name from. Now, all of these diving birds have the same ecologic job. We call it a niche, and that is to dive in the water and find their food. That's the same job as the penguins. But the penguins only live in the southern hemisphere, and they don't fly. Whereas the puffins, they are only living in the northern hemisphere, and they can fly. Now, we already have some questions coming in. We have a lot of people that are viewing our programs from either a group or a classroom online setting. And we have a couple of kindergarten classes. This one's Mrs. Para's class. We had a few others hanging out with us this morning. I was helping answer questions earlier today. To all our teachers and young learners that are out there, thank you for watching and keep tuning in. We have so many great programs that are going to be airing all throughout May. All right, so the birds. But are there more birds than just the black and white birds, the diving birds that go really far into the water to find their food? There are. There's lots of different species of birds. You might have seen a number of tropical species of birds. We have one kind of tropical bird here at the Aquarium of the Pacific called the lorikeet. Have you seen them before? You might have heard them before, even if you didn't go in the exhibit. Lorikeets are a type of parrot. Now, there's tropical birds, there's seabirds, there's shorebirds, there's a lot of species of birds on the planet. What is a big difference we see from the lorikeet compared to the penguins and the puffins? They're very brightly colored. The lorikeets have a lot of bright colors on them, and it's so bright it helps them hide in their habitat. If they were trying to live somewhere kind of rocky and cold without a lot of color, they would definitely stand out. But in a tropical forest, they're going to blend in very well because of all the colors you see on their body. Now, there's different kinds of rainbow lorikeets. There's, I think, 20 different subtypes of rainbow lorikeet. Here's the three that we have. We have the green naped. The nape is like the neck, so you can see this green back here. You can also tell they have this kind of striping pattern right here. Then we have the Swainson's lorikeet, which has almost like a tie-dye yellow, orange, and red pattern on their chest and a blue belly. And then we have the Edwards lorikeet, which has an all-yellow chest. So our three types that we have here, they are very social birds. They do have groups of friends. They do have their nests that they prefer, the areas of the exhibit they like to be in. And the puffins have very similar behaviors too. They have very specific nest spots in the exhibit that they like to be in. But their habitats are extremely different. The lorikeets are just outside in their aviary, and it's open air. They have the containing netting around them so they don't go anywhere, but it's open to the environment. We have a video of the lorikeets. One of our staff, Amanda Bueno, was able to take this video for us. She's one of the caretakers for the birds. Now, this is not as loud as lorikeets have ever been. They were actually very quiet for this video, which is a little surprising because they're pretty noisy birds. But did you see there's a lot of branches? It's open and bright. It's very different than the diving bird habitat. We have a video of some of the diving birds in their space. Let's take a look and see what's different about their habitats. Well, the first thing you might notice is that these birds like to sit in the water. There wasn't a big pool of water in the lorikeet habitat, but also the diving birds are behind a window. This is one of the few exhibits in our aquarium that is temperature air controlled with also having filtered air. Here's the pigeon guillemots in between their coloring. So their exhibit is a cold air habitat, and we have to make sure it stays cold by having an air conditioning system run inside that space. And we also filter the air with very good HEPA-style filters so that they're as healthy as possible. But it's a interesting space because it has to be very strongly monitored. Whereas the lorikeets, whatever nature is doing outside, that's kind of the weather they're going to get. So if it's raining, the birds hang out inside their huts. We have some shaded areas, some overhangs that they can hang out in, but it's not anything we can control. Whereas the diving birds exhibit, we have to monitor and try to copy as much of their cold northern habitat as possible. Now, a couple questions come in. Genevieve is asking, have the puffins been acting differently since we aren't open to the public? I've been watching a few of the animals, and some of them probably take more notice of me because there's nobody else walking around, but they don't really do a whole lot of different things than they might on their regular days. Since the window to the puffin exhibit is so thick, I think it's about 4 or 5 inches thick, they can't even really see or hear us. They can see us, but they really can't hear us. So that's not a big change. They might be curious why there's not as many people around. We do still have staff that are in the building that are working, taking care of the animals, but not the many guests that we normally would have. A lot of the fish are behaving just as normally as they would no matter who is here. So some animals are very minimally changing their behavior, but others are pretty much doing the same thing they do every day. Good question. So we have some video of our diving birds swimming. So we saw them floating and hanging out on the top, but let's take a quick look at what the diving birds do while they swim. Check that out. Have you seen birds swimming in the ocean before? I've seen them floating on top. since I haven't really been underwater when they're swimming around, I don't usually get to see something like this. It's a great opportunity that we have the exhibit that we can watch what they're doing. Now, the other thing you can take a look at is that their feet are pretty far back on their body. It's not quite like other birds where their feet are very centered underneath them. Because of the way that their bodies are set up and allowing them to swim, this is actually the perfect moment to pause on this tufted puffin. Those feet are very far back on the body for kicking and swimming purposes, steering a little bit as they go in the water too. So when they're swimming, using their wings and they're flapping their wings, just like if they're flying underwater. They don't stick their wings way out. They're kind of tucking them in a little bit. Have you ever seen a picture of a submarine before, like a military submarine? Have you noticed it has little wings on it too? Well, in air and water, the motion or the physics of what you're doing are very much the same. But water is very dense, so you don't need as much surface area. So instead of having a bird to stick their wings way out, they have their wings tucked in a little bit, and they can still fly. So they have their wings for flying underwater. They're swimming with them. They're pushing just like we would push with our arms. And then their feet can help steer. But at the surface, they're using their feet to paddle around and go where they need to go. All right, so that's a lot of diving bird information. I think Luke is writing down a couple questions, so I'll wait to move on before we get some of those questions. After we talk about the diving birds, we're going to talk more about the shorebirds, the ones that live along the shoreline in the wetlands and the marshes. Okay, so where does the name Puffin come from? Turns out it's an English word, puff, as in fat. They're fluffy or puffy. They're like they're very stout birds. If you've ever seen a puffin in actuality, they're not dainty birds. They're very stout, thick birds. So that probably comes from their big, fluffy, rounded body nature. Very similar to other birds that dive deep into the water where they have very big bodies, the penguins. So penguins have very stout bodies too. Not really long necks like some of our other bird friends have, but their bodies are well adapted to get in the water and to swim into very deep segments so that they can hunt and find their food. The puffins will carry at least 4 or 5 fish in their beak back up to the surface to eat. They don't really feed underwater like a penguin will. All right, so that's a little bit about our swimming birds. But what about some of the birds that do fly here at the aquarium? We have birds in 2 different areas of the building that are the shorebirds. We have a shorebird exhibit, which is one of my favorite exhibits, honestly, because it combines the wetland habitat above water and below water. So we have a lot of fish in there. We have a lot of little round rays, stingrays. We have some flatfish in there to be the aquatic equivalent of that habitat, to make it look just like these birds would have if they were out in the marshes, out in the nature. But then on land, they have the grasses, they have the trees, they have nest boxes, so that they can do all the normal behaviors that a shorebird would be doing. Well, let's take a look at one of our shorebird examples real quick, and let's make some more observations about the birds. What's different and what's the same? What can we see on this shorebird? Is that a shorebird? Ha! Got you. That is a pigeon guillemot. That is not a shorebird. Is that a pigeon guillemot? That's a big difference in coloring. What's different do we notice about the white ibis? The whole body is white. Really good. What else do we notice about the white ibis? It has this long curved beak right here, and it's kind of a reddish color, which is almost similar to the puffins. What else about their habitat? What do we notice in the space where the white ibis lives? Well, we can see some of the plants right here, some logs. We even painted a mural behind them to look kind of like the marshes of California. Let's take a look at another diving bird, and let's see what else we can come up with for similarities and differences. This is one of my favorites of our birds here at the aquarium. This is the black-necked stilt. Now, their beak is really skinny and long right here. It kind of gets hidden by the shadows of the plants right there. But you can see there's a very big difference of their exhibit space. It's an open-air aviary, so it's outside. Whatever nature's doing, that's kind of what their habitat is going to do at the moment. So when it's warm, the birds will hide in the shade, they'll be in the water, they'll get out of the heat. If it's raining, they'll still find shelter so they can get out of the rain. But a lot of them, they don't mind being wet or getting rained on at all. Now, what do we notice about the legs of this bird? Those are some pretty interesting legs. The black-necked stilt has the longest leg to body size ratio, or no, the second longest leg to body size ratio. Now, one other bird. What bird do you know or have maybe seen pictures of that likes to stand on one leg, has this really curved neck, and is very pink? Flamingos! Flamingos have the longest leg to body size ratio, and the stilt is the second longest. Now, the funny thing that we were talking about last time is how do penguins walk? The waddling of behavior. When a penguin waddles, if you kind of wrapped your like a sweater or something around your legs so your knees couldn't really bend, could you walk like you normally would? Not exactly. Well, birds do have knees. Follow along with on this one. That's not the knee. But wait, I thought the knees just went backwards. That's not the knee. That is the ankle. So when you think about birds, their knee is up inside all of this material right here. Their knees are up high. And what we're seeing back here that bends backwards is the ankle. So their legs are the same design as ours. The knee will bend the leg back like this, and then the ankle will bend the foot forward. So the kind of silly thing to sometimes watch is that when they sit like all the way flat-footed, it looks like their legs are not working correctly. It's an interesting thing to see, but what we look at when we look at birds is that this is the ankle. All right, we had some questions coming in. Felix has been watching, I think, all morning. Thanks for asking questions, Felix. I've been talking on the chat line earlier today. Do penguins have teeth, and do sharks eat the birds? Most birds have very different beaks or bills. Kind of depends on the species that you're looking at. Now, they don't have teeth like we have teeth, but some birds do have a serrated beak. Our penguins, there's our penguin skull. So, I think Dana was showing you the penguin skull earlier. They don't have teeth, but they do have a serrated beak, like a knife is serrated. And that means they can kind of cut and grab through some of their food. And I think Dana's going to try and find a picture of the penguin with its mouth open. If we can show that to you, it's a great way to see what their inside of their mouth actually looks like. So penguins don't have teeth, birds don't have teeth, but they can have some pretty sharp beaks that can be very painful if they actually bit somebody. Now, here's the picture of the penguin. Some birds have a flat scooping or filtering kind of beak or bill, whereas the penguin has this long skinny one to catch fish. Now this stuff in the middle here, that's not teeth. The papillae are to help grab and swallow their food so it doesn't come back out. The other thing is, in some cases, animals will regurgitate or throw up material, and it keeps the food in. So if they needed to spit out some of the water but not their food, that's what the papillae are helping to do. That's really noticeable on a turtle. All right, we had a couple more questions. Mrs. Parker's class is asking questions. Luke's been writing very hurriedly, so I'm going to see how many questions we can get through. How fast do penguins swim? Depends on the penguin. The fastest of the penguins is the Gentoo, which can swim over 20 miles an hour. Our penguins are swimming, when they're sprinting, maybe 15 miles an hour or a little bit less. Now, they are fast enough that they can jump out of the water. It's called breaching. So they can go real fast in and out of the water. And it's honestly really fun to watch. Whenever they're really excited after a feed, they all start going very active in the water, swimming as much as they can. And sometimes you watch them and you can't even tell how fast they're going because they're zipping back and forth across the exhibit as quickly as possible. And how long do the penguins live? Well, penguin lifespans are not incredibly long like a parrot's would be. Even our lorikeet, rainbow lorikeets will live longer than most penguin species. In the human care environment, penguins can live much longer. We had a penguin named Henry. He was one of my favorite penguins. He lived into his late 20s, if not, I think, at least 30 years old. Now, normally, Magellanic penguins out in their home habitat might only live 10 to 15, maybe 20 years. Henry was able to have a much longer lifespan because of the constant health care we have, the food that we provide, staff monitoring them all day, every day. So it's really different than when they're here with us. They are able to live a lot longer than they otherwise would. What do the birds eat? Well, the penguins are eating fish, a diet of herring and capelin. The other birds, like the puffins you saw, the puffins are going to eat fish and krill. Now, for fun and for enrichment, which is like play with a purpose, we'll throw mealworms into the water. It sounds gross for us. I don't know if I'd want to chase mealworms. You? No? Okay. The mealworms will sink, but it allows the birds to dive in the water and practice those diving and swimming skills so they can grab their food. Now, some of the birds will be able to eat the mealworms while they're underwater, but in other cases, the fish we don't throw in the water because it can sink to the bottom and it can make the water pretty gross. So we put out the food into trays into the exhibit for them to sit here. I think the video of just the birds floating around, you might be able to see the food trays inside. But we set the food out. Remember, it's air conditioned. It's cold in there, so the food's not really going to warm up and go bad. But we do change it out. So we put out trays of krill for some of the smaller birds and trays of fish for the puffins. And that's how they get to feed. And we'll, I think that's just it. The fish, the krill, and the mealworms for the diving birds. See, can we see the plate? Not exactly, but this is one of the corners we sometimes put them in. There's a couple spots we put the plates of food in there for them. Do they live in ice or can they live in warm weather too? Well, the penguins and the puffins mostly just live in colder habitats. Now, it's not necessarily an icy, snowy, frozen habitat. Only 2 of the 17 types of penguins are true Antarctic penguins, meaning they nest inside the boundary of Antarctica. The Gentoo penguin will nest on kind of the outer northernmost reaches. So here's a Gentoo penguin. They have this very lovely white kind of hairband thing going on. They are the fastest penguin. We talked about them. But they'll still be in ice because they're still on the islands and northernmost extent of Antarctica. They're just not on the interior of Antarctica. So they're still a penguin that might see snow, but not really an Antarctic penguin. Now, the other penguins can live in very temperate or even mildly warm climates. So the Magellanic penguin, the penguin that we have here, the climate that's in Chile and Argentina is about the same as it is here in California. So this is a very normal space for them to be in. In fact, their exhibit is open air right next to the shorebird exhibit. We don't have to do any climate control for them. They're very used to what it looks like here. Now here is a penguin beach with thousands and thousands of penguins on it. I think these are all the Magellanic penguins. There's 3 types of banded penguins. So if you were watching earlier, you notice now, penguins have this stripe on their chest. So there's 3 types of banded penguins, the Magellanic, the South African, and the Galapagos penguin. So here's a Galapagos penguin. You can see they also have that little band on their body. Even though the Galapagos Islands are very close to the equator, in fact, almost on the equator, it's not super, super warm. It's more temperate. The waters are not extremely warm yet because there's a cold water current that comes up out of South America and then blows across the equator. So they're still pretty temperate, not really cold, but not really warm water there. There's really no penguins that live in a tropical habitat. And as far as I know, there's no puffins that live in a tropical habitat either. All right. Do you know if they're girls or boys? And how many babies can they have? We have to do a blood test on a lot of birds that live here. Not just the penguins, not just the puffins, because a lot of birds do not have what's called sexual dimorphism, where the males have one kind of colors and the females have a different set of colors. The Lorikeets, same thing. They are all the same kind of coloring between males and females, so we have to do a blood test to really figure out which one is which. There are a few birds that have some male-female coloring that we have here. One of them is one of my favorites. It's got a blue bill. It is a type of duck. Now, our male duck he's a little bit older duck, but here he is. This is the breeding season color of the ruddy duck. The buffle-headed male duck, I don't have a picture of the bufflehead, unfortunately. The buffle-headed duck has this white kind of band around its head, kind of like the Gentoo penguin, but then the dark feathers in the front are iridescent, kind of like depending on the light that you see, it's different shades of purple or green, or even the angles you look at him. He has very beautiful coloring. For a lot of birds that have sexual dimorphism, different colors between male and female, the males have to show off and try and attract a female. Now, in other cases for birds that don't have the color difference, they show off in other ways. There's a behavior that they might do. One of my favorite things to watch are the mating dances of a grebe. If you haven't seen it, it is incredible to watch. It's a little comical, but it is also very interesting that there's this very intricate dance that they do to attract a mate and to secure that, yep, we are going to have babies together. So check out the Grebe's, Grebe, Grebe mating dance. It's very interesting. Now, the number of babies that they have, usually penguins will have, if they are nesting and they have mated, they might have 1, maybe 2 eggs per year. Now, this is a picture of a penguin egg. And what we're doing right here is you can hold the egg up to a light, and you can what's called lantern it and see if there's a baby inside the egg. That way you don't have to do an x-ray, you don't have to do anything really high tech. You can just shine a light next to the egg and see if there's a baby growing inside. Now here's one of our penguins with one of their eggs. During nesting season, we'll have a few breeding pairs that will create a nest and try to have an egg. And the cool thing is right now, we have a nest cam. So if you want to see what penguins do when they're nesting, now I warn you, it's not always exciting. If you've ever seen a bird nesting, they're just kind of sitting there. But, you know, sometimes both penguins are inside the nest, and every once in a while, both penguins have left so they can go swim, they can go feed. There's a few instances where they'll both be there and they'll both be gone. But this is what it looks like, and they're both in there today. This is what it looks like when penguins are nesting. This is a lot of the leafy material that we put in the exhibit, and we let the penguins take what they wanted, and they grab the leaves and they put them into their nest boxes. So this area that they're in is kind of behind the scenes. It's behind the wall of the penguin exhibit. You can't really see it unless you get a chance to go behind the scenes. And sometimes they get bored and they play with the leaves and stuff. Or maybe that one's out of place and it's trying to reset it right into the right spot that it needs to be. Penguins are very smart, but they're also very playful birds. They do have enrichment, which is that play with a purpose that we provide for them different ways or different activities that we can give them to do inside the exhibit. All right. Kartik, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, is asking, why is a puffin black and white, and is it for camouflage? Yes, it is a form of camouflage. So counter shading is a light belly color and a dark back. So the puffins and the penguins have this. When they're swimming around, it provides a small amount of camouflage to help them hide in that space while they're underwater. So black belly, or if they had a black belly and a white back, that's the opposite effect. That's not what you want. You want, if you're looking up under the light, under the sunlight, the light bellies might blend in a little bit. If they were down below you, the black of their feathers on their back helps them hide in that way. All right, we had a second grade class hanging out and watching today too. We've been getting a lot of questions from so many people today. I really appreciate the questions, and we really appreciate that you're taking the time to hang out with us and learn. Mrs. Simon and Mrs. Malaga? Okay. Their second grade classes are asking, why do penguins only live in the southern hemisphere? That's interesting to think about because they do swim. They could swim farther north, right? Well, what's in the middle of the earth? The equator. Is it really cold right there? No, not really. So this is a map of the range of all the different penguin species. So this region right across the middle of the planet, the equator, is really warm. If their bodies are not well adapted or able to survive warm water, they probably won't ever crisscross that warm water to get up to the north. Same thing with puffins. Puffins, they will migrate and move around, but we won't really see any puffins too often down here. Right, there we go, in Southern California. If you're in Northern California, you might see some puffins. But because they like to stick to the colder habitats, they aren't going to move from one cold space across the hot to get to another cold space. That's a really interesting question. Thank you for asking that. Is the black-necked stilt related to the flamingo because they have such long legs? Great question, because I don't know what families they truly belong to, but the stilts and the flamingos, they're all birds. So we can say they're all related because they're all birds, but they have very different species they live in and very different habitats. Of the few types of flamingos, they inhabit very specific rivers or waterways where they can eat crustaceans and shelled animals in the water. Whereas the stilt is a bird that lives in the marshes. So it's eating very different things. Look at this very skinny, almost pointer stick-like skinny beak. They use that to get into the sand to find their food. So because they live in very different habitats, they have very different feeding styles, they're not super closely related, but they are both birds with really long legs. Do you think that this bird is really closely related to the ostrich? Another really long-legged bird. So they might have similar body features, but they have very different histories in very different regions that they belong to. Great question. Why can't penguins fly? Well, if you remember, we were talking about density. The bones of a penguin are very dense. They aren't able to fly. They also don't have the right feathers to fly. So look at the feathers of this stilt. We can actually see the outlines of their very big feathers. Here is another bird in the water that can swim and fly. On their wings, they still have very large feathers. These are for their flight feathers. That helps them actually maintain air as they fly across. Okay, do the arm airplane thing we go? Arm plane? Arm plane's a word now. We're just going to go with it. Okay, but a penguin has very small feathers on their wing. Check this out. You can still see the feathers, but they're very, very tiny, and it makes the wing look very smooth. So they're really not adapted to fly at all. Even if their bones were not as dense, their bodies were lighter weight, their feathers on their wings are not the right kind of feather to fly. So they really couldn't, even if they really wanted to. Okay, let's see. We had some more questions from Connor and Laura. Connor's asking, what is my favorite bird? Connor, that's kind of hard to ask or answer, because I don't know a lot about a lot of different birds, but one of my favorite kinds of birds is, I'm trying to remember the name because I haven't talked about it in a little while. It's a special kind of diving bird. It is I'll figure out the name for us. It's one of the fastest diving birds. So the airspeed it gets to when it's diving can be 70 miles an hour in the air. It's not a falcon. Dana's trying to help Google what it is. It looks like an albatross, but it is a diving bird. And what they've done is they've actually tested the bodies of the birds. Why can they dive at 70 miles an hour into the water? Like they're getting to the water at almost 70 miles an hour. And what they found, I gotta fix my mic. And what they found is that just as the bird is ready to get into the water, it suddenly will stretch out its neck as far as possible, and it will tuck its wings in real tight, and it looks very different than when it's flying. Now, this bird they found out by creating a replica of the bird's head and plunging it into water and testing the physics, the forces that are acting on this bird. And what they found is that if the bird's neck was not perfectly stretched out, it would probably collapse its throat and it would suffocate. So it's been perfectly adapted to diving at 50 to 70 miles per hour as soon as it gets to the water. Last question we had coming into the text line is, are penguins endangered? There are a number of species that are endangered or are threatened, where they're not so low in population that they're not endangered yet, but that's a possibility. We have to make sure that we're doing our part to really look at the populations, their food sources, where they live, make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that they're going to survive. All right, so I think all the questions... Oh, we didn't get to Laura's question. She's asking, did birds originally have honeycomb or solid bone structures, and which would have evolved first? Well, if we're thinking about the history of living things, flight probably happened after birds were kind of birds. Well, if you look at the really history of the birds were dinosaurs at one point, so that's pretty cool. The true dinosaurs did not fly. The flying dinosaur-like animals, they're in a completely different group. So we think of like everything that lived at the time of dinosaurs as dinosaurs, but only the ones that walked on land on 2 or 4 legs were truly considered dinosaurs. So walking came first, and then probably feathers and the ability to stretch their arms out. And at some point, some started to kind of glide and develop the abilities to fly later. So flight would have happened much later, and only those that were light enough in weight would be able to fly. So the evolving bone structure would probably be more solid and evolve into more of a honeycomb or hollowing structure. Great question about the history of birds and flight and all these things. Everybody's been amazing today. Thank you so much for tuning in for our bird segment today, from puffins to penguins, and apparently everything in between, and dinosaurs too. So we have a lot of great activities all in May, but also this afternoon. Don't go anywhere. You can tune in at 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock for our afternoon presentations. We're doing some stuff on filtration and how to build an aquarium and exhibit, and also kelp forests and conservation. So, if you want to learn more about our local habitats and also how we even create a habitat, tune in this afternoon. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday afternoon.